Here you can see we've got one of our rows covered up with the tarp so that it'll be ready for planting cover crop later today. Over here is some boneset, which the insects were just crazy for. It's starting to seed up now, along with a little bit of milkweed. We've got some goldenrod over there, which the insects are just going crazy for, along with some spearmint. Some common milkweed in here, and a bunch of garlic chives that I planted in this row. We actually let the common milkweed come up and planted potatoes as well as Artichokes, the French green beans, in there this summer. And in spite of having all kinds of groundhog problems at this farm, I don't know what it was, if the co-plantings just confused them, but they hardly touched the green beans at all. Potatoes did really well in theirs as well, and as soon as we pulled those out, we seeded it with some buckwheat as a cover crop to help the insects, which has already finished up and gone back to seed. And you can see a little bit of the buckwheat up here. We of course have a little bit of weeding to do in here, but there you can see the buckwheat seeded up, and we'll probably just leave that in place and let it reseed early in the spring on its own. Or I may mow it down and plant this with winter rye as well. But here we've got some walking onions, some garlic chives that we're just letting grow up in here and co-planting things around them. More boneset. Here it is in flower, and you can see the insects are just crazy for it. Over here there's coxcomb, which we've gone ahead and just let grow up after we finished with the potatoes. Leeks are doing fine in the middle here. We had dill interplanted with that. The rabbits didn't let my lettuce come up, but they left a few carrots for us. It's down here in the shade. It's difficult to see, but we'll get a little bit out of that. And though not exactly what I would call cover crop, but co-planting for beneficial insects along this row has it's just enhances the beauty of the farm, and we really enjoy having it in here. And it's really not that hard to clean up. The spearmint down there will send roots underneath your other rows, but it doesn't take hardly any time to just go through and pull them out and get them back into their area. For the hoop house, I'm going to wait for this truck to pass. In the hoop house, we don't so much plant cover crops as we do grow year-round, and essentially use our crop as the cover crop. So there is always something in the soil in the hoop house. We're just about to plant some greens underneath these peppers, which we got a little bit of a late start on, but they're starting to come into their own now. Those were co-planted with black soybeans, which did really well. We normally have greens in this hoop house throughout the summer as much as we can, and until we switch over to tomatoes and other summer plants. But this year with COVID, we just reverted to sort of a homestead mode and planted some Carolina black peanuts in there for fun. On the far side, there's some soybeans co-planted with dill. They got a late start and have had a little bit of insect damage, but we're going to get a good crop of soybeans off of there anyway. So let's walk over here and I'll show you some more. This is an area that, even though we do our best to function in a no-till setup here, I did till this plot. This is some new ground that had been part of a gravel parking lot, and we're converting it into a functional growing area by we started off with a bunch of wood chips with a thick layer of compost on top of that, and now this is its second year in cover crop, and it's starting to do pretty well. So earlier this spring, I actually mowed down the weeds that were on there and leftover cover crops, and then gave it a light tilling and followed up with a really diverse cover crop seeding. I'm not going to remember everything I put in here, but Of course, we had buckwheat and I think 2 or 3 kinds of clover. What you see in front of you here is some phacelia, which if it blooms, it's hard to get it to bloom in this zone. The bees will go crazy for it. It's a great late season flower for them. I think I already said buckwheat. I put in some corn for fun, some broom corn, which you can sort of see. There's one broom corn head there that I haven't collected the seed from. But it was really fun to watch the progression of things coming up in here and blooming. First the buckwheat, then a little bit of clover, and then the taller things started to jump up, and it's just been a continual progression with zero work to manage. I've let some of the other things come up in here. We've got some Jerusalem artichokes that are growing in here, which I didn't really want, but they flower. They add great chunks of biomass to the soil that if you don't harvest them, the worms come in and eat. So this has been a really great, fun thing to have at the farm. Across the way here, again, another part of that parking lot. This one we instead of mowing, we just crimped down and then tarped. And here, this was planted a little over a month and a half ago, maybe 2 months, with a mix of buckwheat, some clovers, sunflowers. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention sunflowers over there, which were absolutely beautiful. Field pea and winter pea, Austrian winter pea. So this area here, I'm really looking forward to seeing how it turns out next year. Again, this was a gravel parking lot that we dug all the gravel out, sifted it out with a vibrating screen, put the dirt back on, and this is its second year in cover crop to try and get the soil built up. You can see further down, we had the tarp further down first. Those sunflowers are mature and have seeded. With any luck, these sunflowers will still get a chance to bloom. They've had it up, but they're not open just yet. But hopefully we'll get a last little bit of sunflowers. And there on the bottom hugel bed before the parking area, you can see a bunch of cosmos that we've got planted. Again, cosmos and coxcombs, and still some goldenrod on that hugel bed. But the insects just love it here. Let's walk on up around the compost piles and into what we call the rodeo field. You can see what we have going on up there. This is our first hugel bed here, which we've kind of let go wild. It does have some things that we want in it, but we're not too worried about it. Even that willow there's doing some good stuff for us, but it'll get trimmed down. Here's our compost pile area. We make great big compost piles and mix in biochar that we produce here on the farm, which I'll be making another video about pretty soon. And there's the ubiquitous wood chips that we use to mulch between our rows. Now up here you can see a little experiment I did between broadcast seeding and using a drill seeder, a little hand-driven Chinese-made plastic drill seeder that has little beaks that poke your seed into the ground before releasing it, which is fantastic for planting in through stuff that you've just crimped down or mowed down. I'm pretty much at the midpoint here, and to the left is where I broadcast seeded and raked in, and to the right, actually I don't even think I raked in very much, but to the right is where I used the Chinese drill seeder, and it worked great. The groundhogs ate most of the sunflowers, but the buckwheat's still there and coming up. This was an area that we let go wild for a year, and we had tons of weeds that most people would just shudder to think having in there. But crimping it down, covering it with a silage tarp we covered it for a month in February, and then uncovered, and we got a great harvest of squash out of here. Plants did better in here than I have ever seen in this. This was an old rodeo that sadly had a ton of gravel and sand in it, and nothing was growing on it. We got this property in spite of it being fallow for 4 years, so it's come a long way since then. Over here you can see we've tarped this area. That's going to come off today, and we'll be seeding it. Beyond that, you can see more buckwheat that's headed up over there, and sunflowers behind that were planted as a cover crop for that. But things are coming along pretty well, and I'll get a little time lapse of us pulling these silage tarps off and seeding it so you can see exactly the procedure we do with that. Here on the other side of the feed now, you can see where this cover crop is finishing up. There's a lot of weeds mixed in this one. This one I crimped down, but there were some pretty stout, strong stalked weeds in there that stood back up. And when your tarp gets lifted off the ground, it doesn't do quite as good of a job as suppressing the weeds in there. So even though this was covered for 2 weeks in the hot sun in the summer, I didn't get a very complete termination of the weeds that were in there before I seeded it. So that was kind of an experiment to see how that would go. If you have weeds that don't want to lay down, it's a good idea to go ahead and scythe them down, which is what I did over here. And you can see that the silage tarp over there is pretty well flat on the ground. The drawback of using a scythe to cut them down is you wind up with a lot of sharp, pointy stalks, which can poke holes in your tarps. So you got to be careful about not walking on your tarps if you do mow it with a scythe or even a mower weed eater, unless you get them really close to the ground. Best not to walk on them if you use that method. And then this over here at the end of the field, sort of the tractor turnaround row, I just seeded that with the cover crop without even covering it. And the buckwheat came up, flowered, it's done. Sunflowers are still there. We've got some other weeds in there, but the bees are still loving these sunflowers. So here we are about to seed the cover crop for this field that we've just removed the silage tarps off of. It's been tarped for about 2 months to get everything totally burned down and dead before we start the cover crop. You might think that's going to get way too hot under there, but interestingly enough, folks have done the test and measured that, and yes, the top inch of your soil gets pretty hot, but anything below that is still in the range that your normal fungus and bacteria seems pretty happy at. So I've not done that test myself, but there's a fair amount of information in books and literature that says this is not all that hard on your soil, which is great. And from what I've seen, I haven't had any negative impacts from using the opaque tarp for an extended period of time. Clear ones, I've had problems where it just concentrates the sun and the heat in there too much. But opaque tarps don't seem to be that big of a deal. So this is a seeder that I don't think a whole lot of people are familiar with. It's kind of cheap and plasticky, which I don't like. You can find these on Alibaba for anywhere between 100 and 300 bucks. This one was like 125. But the cool thing is, you can crimp down your cover crop and then seed directly into it if it's a large seeded crop. So you don't need to do any soil prep. It's a dream for no-till agriculture and regenerative agriculture, where you want to leave all that material in the field and grow your mulch in place. So this thing's really cool. It's got your typical brush, little pockets in here for your seeds to get caught in. As you turn this thing around, the seed gets dropped into the beak, and the beak doesn't open until it's penetrated below your mulch layer and into the soil. So you can see them opening up there. And they drop the seed into contact with the soil in a little pocket in the soil. This cuts down on the amount of seed that you need to use dramatically. You get great germination from your cover crop seeds, and it's been a dream. Like I feel like I need to buy another one for when this one breaks. Here we are in the field. I'm going to load this seeder up make sure that I've got seed coming out of it by spinning it around a couple times. It takes a full revolution at least to start getting the seed to come through. And then we'll do a couple close-ups of passes as it goes by and some faraway stuff so you can just see how this thing works. Planting the seed directly through all of this cut down and covered weeds that were on this field. So again, it's a little bit plasticky, but for $100 for a seeder that actually puts your cover crop seed through your mulch into contact with the soil, it's pretty fantastic. And I'm not going to use nearly that much seed. That's what I brought with me. So let's make sure it's going to drop seed for us here. Some beans coming out from the last thing I used. And here comes the winter rye. So it's dropping like between 2 and 5 seeds, maybe a little bit more each hole. So here we have some cover crop that's just about 2 weeks old. I just weeded a little patch of yellow dock that was coming up here in the furrow. I wanted to show you guys what that fancy Chinese seeder is doing. It drops anywhere between 3 and 10 seeds per hole, but I don't think that's going to be a problem. You can see here you get little clusters everywhere. The little duckbill from that thing drops its seeds, and the peas do much better as far as being singulated. Where's my pea? There it is. There's a pea right there, and there's another one down here. So not a bad turnout. Had a few bare spots here. I didn't run the seeder on this patch, so I'm not sure if my intern had it figured out just right or not, but for $100, being able to seed directly into all of this mulchy thatch that was left over from where I covered this with a silage tarp, it's pretty great. Didn't have to clear anything, didn't have to disturb any soil, just let the seeder put those seeds right into the ground below the mulch. Over here, we just finished pulling out our sweet potatoes, and I hilled up those rows with a rake, and then we chipped them today, and I put just a thin, like quarter to half inch layer of compost on the top of the soil that I'm watering in to get those microbes down into the soil layer. Not really for nutrients, but for the bacterial life that's coming in, the fungal life that's coming in from that compost. We took all the vines from the sweet potatoes, and instead of gathering up and transporting them to a place to compost and then bringing them back as compost, I decided to just put them in a windrow and let them decompose and become a mulch in place there. It was a row that had gotten a little bit weedy, but there's still quite a few chives that we planted in there earlier this year, which I think in the spring we'll be able to push up through the mulch that those vines leave. All right.